I think just the way that the album was created, it was a very different way of making music for us. All living in the same place had a massive influence on the way the album turned out. And I think it was probably the most amount of time we've spent in the studio on any album. I think on The Resistance it was recorded in little blocks, because we all lived in different countries at that time. We'd all get together for 5 days or a week, and then we would go home for a couple of weeks. So we generally found with that album that when we got together for the 5 days, we had to get as much work done as we possibly could. I think with this album, we never really felt that kind of pressure, because we knew if we didn't get anything done one week, we were all still going to be there the next week. We could come back in. I think a lot of the time we just, there were some days where we didn't record anything. We would just mess around with different equipment and different synths and try different things, And I think that's a good way to make music. And I think a lot of these songs came from, a lot of experimentation. When we did The Resistance, we decided beforehand that we were going to try and produce the album ourselves. And I think there was a point, maybe 2 or 3 weeks in, where we almost went back on that decision, because I think we found it quite difficult. I think we found it because you have to be very decisive, you have to be very critical of each other. I think it's something that we were struggling with a little bit. The hardest thing is obviously we did 2 albums with Rich Costi, and he's a great producer, and he's just a great guy to have around. If you want a certain sound, he will make it happen. When you're producing yourself, you have to make it happen yourself, and you don't always know what it is that you have to do to get that sound. So, The Resistance was quite a learning process, and I think coming out of making The Resistance, at that point, I think we all, have some kind of studio set up in our houses now. So, when I go home, I'm still making music, and I'm learning about the studio and learning about new ways of making new sounds, and Matt does the same, and Dom has a little setup as well. So, by the time we got to making this album, I think our knowledge of the studio and the technology that surrounds the studio was much better than it was 4 years ago. When I stopped drinking, I went through it was a pretty rough few months, and I think living in when you drink all the time, you have this constant cloud, this constant mist that surrounds you. Your thoughts and the way that you go about your everyday life, and you never really fully absorb anything. And it was very difficult, because when I stopped, as much as I kind of had this clarity, there was a whole bunch of stuff that I had to deal with, not just related to the drinking, but just things that had happened over a course of many years. That when I stopped drinking, I realised that it is what I am, and it's what I want to do. And I think part of the process of getting through that period was that I just 100% threw myself into music. Yeah, I think we've got this pyramid that hangs above us, which it kind of can invert, so it can go upside down or whatever, and that's going to be the main video screen. I hope so. Yeah, I think that's the plan. It was great in 2010. That was the first time we did a proper stadium tour. Obviously 2007 we did Wembley, and we did one in France, but 2010 I think we did a handful of stadiums, I think maybe 9 or 10, and it was an amazing way to tour.